Okay, so hello everyone. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning from wherever in the world you are joining from. First of all, we warmly welcome you to this weekly webinar series on empowering finance professionals to play a business-centric role at the forefront. It's going to be organized by HOFT, Hub of Finance Transformation. This is a platform that we have formed to transform accountant and finance professionals into strategic leaders around the globe. And this weekly webinar series is just a part of our continuous efforts to support the global community of accounting and finance professionals to transform their careers and to play a more business-centric role like finance business partnering or strategic business partner to add tremendous amount of value in their careers as well as to their employers, businesses, and the organizations that they are working for. So we have started this weekly webinar series that is a 3 months long learning and development journey, and we are highly excited to kick off our very first session, weekly session, that is a part of this series, and it is on guide to successful finance business partner engagement. That is going to be presented by Mr. Stewart Houston, who has joined us already from United Kingdom. He will be giving you his introduction as well, and he will be going to present this topic. Just before that, I will quickly tell you about the logistics of this webinar. It's going to be a 1 hour long webinar from 6 p.m. to 7 p.m. Dubai time, and we will be having a Q&A session at the end. So during the session, if you have any question, you can also just write your question in the chat box, and we will try to address as maximum as possible all the question during the Q&A. Or alternatively, during the Q&A, you can unmute yourself and you can speak up and directly ask any questions what you have from Stewart. During the session, just I recommend you to please keep yourself on the mute mode and keep your webcams off so that in order to avoid any distraction or distortion during the session. Just I will quickly give you an overview of our strategic finance leadership framework at HOFT, because all of our weekly webinar series as well as our virtual conferences are based on this strategic finance leadership framework that we have developed to support our global community of finance professionals who wish to transform themselves into the role of finance business partners or strategic finance leaders ultimately. So this is based on the 6 main pillars. As you can see, it's include from financial leadership, personal, public, technology, strategic, and operational leadership. So today, and as well as in the upcoming webinar, we are going to give you flavors from each of these pillars to help you transform yourself, to initiate your transformation journey towards the finance business partnering. And I hope you will get lots of value from it. And this is the vision at HOFT, to support the global community of finance professionals to play a more business-centric role and to transform themselves into the role of finance business partner and strategic leader. So today's topic is also very interesting. It's a very important topic because, as you know, without the effective engagement of finance business partner, he cannot act as a value creator until and unless the finance business partner is not effectively engaged with the non-finance business function, especially. Of course, they cannot add value to the overall organization. So that's what Stewart is going to talk about today, and he has more than 2 decades of experience in the field of finance. He has a very rich corporate experience, and currently also he is working as Executive Director FP&A in the healthcare industry. So we can get lots of value from his knowledge, from his experience on finance business partnering engagement. So without taking further time, I will just release the controls and hand over the session to Mr. Stewart. Just give me a second. Okay, Stewart, over to you now. I think you are on the mute. Yeah,
I am.
fine.
Yes, yeah. Let's take that back to the start. Okay. So taking it from the top. Good afternoon, evening, morning, everyone. Hope you're all well on this. I'm coming to you from London, sunny London for once. Long may it last, but undoubtedly it won't. So I'm coming today to talk to you about business partnering, which is a subject very close to my heart. So I think I've been business partnering for most of my kind of finance career. Before the term business partnering came around, I certainly looked to practice working with finance colleagues, non-finance colleagues, helping where I can, filling in, and obviously supporting the business and pushing the targets and goals of the business forward. So I think I've been practicing it even before the term came along, but now the term has come along, we can try and put together, package up how we can best practice this. But I stress, and this is a running theme through every time I discuss business partnering, I will stress that no one has all the answers. No one has exclusivity to how you should practice it, because all of our situations are different. So take advice, etc., from various guides you'll see on the internet, but there's no Bible out there as to how to do finance business partnering. And I think that's the interesting attribute to it, is that the variables within your company and the external landscape, that all of that is changeable. And that whole dynamic on a month-to-month, quarter-to-quarter, year-to-year basis will be different. So you have to stay fluid and flexible with that. So you can never lock down on thinking you have all the answers, because the answers will change and the questions will change. So that's, I think, what the interesting aspect is for me, is you have to stay nimble and think how you can best help the business and our business partners. And I've certainly found that I have been able to over the years. So hopefully I can impart some of that experience to you today. So my current role, I'm Executive Director of Financial Planning and Analysis. Obviously, financial planning and analysis is the traditional forecasting, budgeting, variance analysis role, which I still do to a degree, but the value add is really in the business partnering piece, where I'm helping the teams understand their numbers and then encouraging them to look at ways to proceed to improve their numbers, etc. And certainly, hopefully, got lots of examples of that for you today. So, first slide is who am I? Now, the context of who am I here is more around. I don't want to leave the meeting. Sorry, I'm trying to get full screen so I can see my slide deck. Sorry, yeah, that's better. Apologies for that. Okay, cool. So yes, in the context of business partnering, I just wanted to give you a flavour of some of the things I've been involved with over the years. Another of my themes through this presentation is credibility. Just to show that I have credibility and I'm not just theorizing about business partnering this is how you do it. I have actually been practicing it for years and had some good outcomes, bad outcomes, and probably learned as much from the bad outcomes as I have the good. So you just don't repeat those bad practices or whatever. So I'll just run through a few of those just to show there's no channel or focus that you need to go down. There are multiple functions and colleagues that you can work with within your group, and that includes finance people as well. You shouldn't discount them, because there are obviously areas in finance which are more or less focused on process improvement and whatever else that we can actually assist with. And this goes back, some of these initiatives go back 15-20 years. The return on investment on marketing programs was at Cisco, and that was 16 years ago. I worked at Cisco and their distribution finance team. Cisco got massive marketing, they had marketing teams on top of marketing teams. They have tier 1 marketing, tier 2 marketing, central marketing. They are a marketing machine, and very good at marketing. But what they weren't necessarily very good at is keeping the discipline and the finances around that. So I was brought in to try and instill some discipline and control around that, so they weren't just putting accruals in for POs that were never, they were good receipting POs and accruing them where the goods hadn't actually been delivered yet, but they wanted to do that. They thought they had to do that to secure their budget, and of course that just rolled on, and eventually had a balance sheet accrual of millions of dollars that would have been paid if someone had invoiced Cisco. So whilst the controls that I brought in, I couldn't say they were popular, and they certainly weren't popular. But the flip side to that, as part of their budget allocation process, I introduced a process where they could apply for budget based on, you know, the local marketing team could have a great idea and they'd apply for budget based on their great idea, and also, you know, have some ROI with that. So a central team would review these and agree or disagree that there was a great idea and give follow-up reporting, etc., for them to do that. So although my initial remit wasn't particularly popular, it was necessary but not popular. I did look to try and, you know, work more positively with those teams to actually produce something, you know, that did have a positive business impact from their side. Obviously, the you know, financial controls were a necessity, so it did have a positive business impact. The next couple of examples worked with sales teams. There was a habit, and this was at Nortel, so again a IT telco company. Worked within a department which was selling software. It was interactive voice software or contact center software, so all the call center software stuff and the call routing. We sold that, and it was a very good product, but there was a habit where it was sold with hardware product. The sales team would deep discount because there were no cost of sales associated with the software. It was all R&D cost that was sunk. So they were deep discounting 60-70% and still getting decent, reasonable margin, not realizing that of course then impacted on the ability to fund future research and development, which still needed funding. You know, you're actually, although the cost of sale wasn't there, the ability to put money back in for future R&D was, and the you know, impacted the development of the software itself and the top line revenue. So that was something that had to be redressed, and it was. But again, one of my learnings through that process, and one of my continual regrets that I think of periodically and just wish I had forced it through, was within that team there were maintenance revenues, which I know for a fact the sales team were always focusing on their next $20 million deal, not their 300K maintenance renewal. I know for a fact that the process we had in place, we weren't doing those renewals appropriately, and people were being supported and not invoiced. So I regret not following through on my instincts there. And ever since then, I've kind of thought, right, if it doesn't feel right, I'm going to follow through, you know, to the point where I can, you know, I'm pretty certain that what my gut feeling said was not correct. So always try, and if it doesn't feel right, follow through until you're comfortable with what your feeling is, because there's a good chance that what you're feeling is correct, and therefore, you know, something you can fix within the company. So that would be one piece of advice I'd give to you. Various other groups I've been working with, and obviously I've gone back 15-20 years for a couple of examples. My current company work with the operations team to generate a productivity measure. So the KPI that we use for productivity is utilization. So any of you guys out there in the services industry will appreciate that utilization is essentially the available time less the billable time. Now the problem with utilization is there is an assumption that the billable time is useful time and is actually billable. But of course, if you have booked the time to a project or study or whatever it is, however you're measuring your work, and you haven't produced anything, or your work is actually of a poor quality that's going to have to be redone, of course that is not something that should be measured as productivity. So I've been at pains to try and change our focus into what's actually been produced. So the units that have been recognized in our systems will have an hours associated with them based on our contract, and I've been allocating those hours to the individuals who are booking the time, and not the actual just the standard, I've booked 100 hours this month to project X, therefore those 100 hours are productive. Obviously with that comes a bit of education with the teams, etc., and how to use that, and that any of these reports, and again this is I think a good footnote, any of these reports where you're trying to roll them out you should stress that this is not a conclusive answer. This is not saying that John Smith or whomever is not being productive, but that the data in our own system suggests that they haven't. And it may be that the units haven't been recorded. You can't conclusively say that John Smith is inefficient, but the record we have for John Smith needs to be looked over by his functional manager or project manager or whomever else. So I think that's important to take away the big brotherish feel of these things. Sometimes your finance are coming with this report and telling you X, because finance usually come with definitive answers, because we work to rules and etc. within finance. So these are more blurred and softer aspects. So you then have to come and say, looking at this data, I think there's something we need to look into, rather than conclusively this is wrong. So I hope that makes sense. Okay. So business partner strategy. These are, I'll move that out of the way if you've got the same view as I have. So these are 4 kind of core building blocks that I have found in my experience are the natural steps into business partnering. So the initial one is the provision of useful information. I would hope most people are at that point in their careers anyway. We're providing useful information, but that useful information should always be summarized. There are too many reports that I've received in my time that it does not give me a story, it does not give me something that summarizes for them to maybe look back at the detail, but sometimes it's just a detail, or it's just literal. You've made a request for something, and whoever who's produced it has not tried to summarize and tell you the story from that. They've just literally given you the data dump that you've asked for, which is obviously less than useful. And where you do try and provide a story, that then opens up the narrative for you to go into what I would call step 2, and that's embellishing that with some narrative of your own. So once you start to understand what that core base data is providing, then you're sprinkling an element of value onto that report by then giving the group your take on it, for them either to obviously educate you back, because what you're seeing is not necessarily what they're perceiving or whatever, or equally it's something that should be followed up on. So that's a very important step. Now I'll stress at this point, although I've put these 4 steps, there's no time scale to this. You don't have to, you don't have to wait 3 months and then move to step 2 and wait another 3 months, step 3. This could happen in a very quick time frame. It just depends on the nature of the organization, which I'll talk about later on. But obviously have an appreciation of who you're dealing with and where they are in their openness to working with finance, etc. Because you can't necessarily go from stage 1 to stage 4 without building up your own learning and education. So that should, having opened that narrative with these teams, that should then, where you are seeing something that needs following up on, investigating or whatever, that then will fall into a collaboration to look to fix it. Because even if you're not directly involved in the fixing, having provided the data which floated up what was wrong, what was perceived to be wrong initially, you will obviously be part of that refresh of the data and recalibration and resummarization of that same data to show that we're on the path to improvement, or whatever the goal was that you both agreed was possible when you reviewed the data in the first instance. So during all of these first 3 steps, you're building your knowledge of that team, and during that whole process, it's okay to ask what may be perceived to be naive or ignorant questions, but you can do that, because you're no expert in that field. And whilst I don't encourage you to ask questions for questions' sake, I work a lot with programmers in my organization. I don't need to know how to program, but I do need to understand what they're programming, how that flows in our process to how we're being paid, etc., etc. So you need to understand as much as you need to understand to then impart knowledge on the and see how that plays out on the finance side, on cost margin, revenue, or whatever. But you obviously don't need to go into the level of detail that you know the nuances and the ins and outs of the role. So do ask questions above and beyond where you think barriers and you know, break down those barriers where you think the natural barriers between finance and operations, or finance and facilities, or finance and IT, break those down and get as much understanding as you need into that group. So don't think you can't ask those questions, and sometimes it's the dumb questions from someone who's not as involved in the detail that's actually the catalyst to realizing that, you know, perhaps things have changed and we're not necessarily doing things in the most logical manner, or they're not thinking of downstream processes or whatever else. So ask questions, get yourself involved, but you need to do that, it's best to start building up that relationship first. And then what you will get to on a natural form is you start to instigate initiatives yourself. You don't necessarily need to have that buy-in. Ultimately you will, but you can actually, you have enough knowledge and experience of that group to then look at data and, you know, trends and history and whatever else, and make suggestions as to what you should be looking at with them, or, you know, just a general comment around something that doesn't seem to be performing as well as it did, or even something that's performing really well in one instance and not in another, and you want to capture best practice and then reapply that somewhere else. So it doesn't have to, you know, these aren't formulaic or prescriptive areas that we're talking about. These are what you will come across as you're working through with these teams. So yeah, that's what I would encourage you to do. Okay, so what I've done here, I've put 12 business partnering hotspots, just kind of one word, two word, sometimes a sentence. Now, as I was doing this, there's probably 112 business partner related, you know, headlines or keynote phrases, etc. you could use. But these are 12 I think are quite key and kind of succinct and get us to the point. So take it from the top. So number 12, take advice but do not be restricted by it. So I'm obviously trying to give you advice today, and I'm encouraging you to use what is applicable to your organization or your stage in your career or whatever else, but don't be restricted by it. So don't think that you have to slavishly follow one methodology or another and that's going to work in every instance, because what you'll do, you'll build your own experience up, taking experience, what worked, what didn't work, other people's experiences, etc., and you will amalgamate that into your own best way of working. And as we said at the top, I've been 20 years in finance and I'm still learning. I'm still trying to, you know, not restrict myself to be held by my previous experience and be biased by that. So I, you know, encourage you just to keep an open mind all the time, because, you know, as I said, we're changing, the world's changing, as we know from the last few months. You know, who could have predicted what has gone on? But as long as we're not, you know, cowed by those experiences, we can actually not necessarily profit from them, but mitigate against them. So here's a common theme I've come across over the years, and that is, what do finance know about? And I left the gaps because there's a multitude of things you could fit in: marketing, operations, IT. What do finance know about the thing that I do every day, that I went to university and you know, got a professional qualification in, or whatever else? But by the same token, you know, don't, where we think other groups should be open-minded to what we're trying to ask them about their particular function or operation, where people are asking questions back about finance and questioning what we do, you know, allow that to flourish. So answer those questions, and sometimes they will, you know, these groups will come back with something where how finance are dealing with their information is not necessarily the most logical or the most value add or whatever else. So where I say, what do finance know about, I could flip that to, what do marketing know about finance? So just, yeah, it's a two-way street. So just keep that street open, keep the lines of communication open, and don't be closed off as to, you know, we've got most of us will have accountancy qualification or be working towards that, but that does not make us the gurus of everything that goes on in finance. There are aspects of it where an outsider looking in could see something that doesn't quite make sense and could be worked better, especially when it's interacting with their group. Have faith in yourself. If you don't have faith in yourself, you can't expect other people to do so. So I've always been at pains to where I'm summarizing that information and making not conclusive judgments, but making some form of inference from the data. I will always go to the nth degree to make sure that data is correct. And once I've done that, we can all put together some information and make some assumptions, and that's not wrong. You may not have the full set of assumptions, so therefore with that other assumption coming in, it changes the landscape of what you've produced. But I think as long as you go through that due diligence and building up your knowledge and whatever the report is telling you, just have faith in that, because you're presenting something with this set of assumptions in these circumstances. So there's nothing wrong with that. There's no right or wrong answers there, and you'll either have something that's in the right ballpark, or you'll learn from it because you're missing some information that someone will impart. And that goes out to the fact that you don't come in with telling people this is factual, you need to, this is wrong and you need to fix it. You go in and say, with this information, from what I can perceive with these assumptions, this doesn't look quite right. Can we discuss it? So it's just a slightly different take on things, and but have faith in yourself to do that, because that's quite a difficult talent to learn. Is being able to go to these other groups, the SMEs, the subject matter experts, and have an opinion on what they're doing and producing. So remain objective but collaborative. So don't become an extension of a department. So don't become an echo chamber for what they think, but retain that objectivity. Otherwise, you become part of. If there's a problem, you become part of the problem, because you will just be reinforcing whatever they have said, and that's not what we're here to do. It's just we're slightly different. You need to just keep that distance, so you can give the objective view. So that, these groups, per my marketing example or the sales example, they're not going to necessarily like what you're saying, but they can't really argue the logic of it. So, and then obviously, as I said, if you can get a positive spin on the back of that and give them something back, then the relationship will grow and flourish, and you're not just coming in and pointing out what's wrong, but you're saying inferring what's wrong, but saying how you could do things better. So always try and have that up your sleeve. Retain flexibility, which I've kind of run through as a theme, that you don't ever lock down on thinking you know everything, and your knowledge is you've gained enough knowledge to be able to do everything, because that never happens, because nothing stays the same. And even within, I've been at PRA for 12 years, and nothing in that company has stayed the same. So I've had to be flexible to work with that and recognize that, and look ahead to see where things are shaping up differently, to then plan on how I can support the business differently. So always retain that flexibility, and don't rest on your laurels or your previous successful engagement. So build credibility, going back to what I said through those 4 steps. Hopefully you will do that by being open to their suggestions and giving positive feedback back to them, but making sure that what you're giving them is directionally correct or whatever. Never send something out on a Friday evening which is a judgmental view on what's gone on. Always wait till the Monday morning, sanity check it, just see if it makes sense. So don't release something in haste because you think you've found something that's different or whatever. Just give yourself that bit of breathing space. Having worked on something for a few hours, there's a good chance you're number blind to it. So just give yourself till the next day, look it over, especially if it's something that's quite critical or material in what you're referring. Just give yourself a few days to look over that, because that obviously if you start giving out numbers or raising alarms where there are none, your credibility will not flourish, and you need to build that credibility, because that is how people will then start coming to you for you, rather than you going to seek them for initiatives. You will be the go-to for them if you have that credibility. So assume nothing. That is part of that, the naive or non-subject matter expert question. The questions I've asked over the years where the answer hasn't been what I've expected, that has happened numerous times, and invariably the subject matter expert of the operational group has said that's a good question. I don't know why we don't do that, and we have gone on to do something different. So just don't. If you're on the cusp of assuming something, ask the question first. So, and again, you'll build your knowledge by doing that. So there's nothing wrong with doing that. But assume nothing. Because don't think that something seems so logical that it must be happening, because sometimes it isn't. So that's definitely one area I'd encourage you in, and something I've consistently found over the years. Be tenacious and persistent. Going back to having faith in yourself. If you know in your heart something doesn't feel right, then follow it through to the end. Now, you may be promoting or proposing something that just doesn't fit in with the current goals, and or we just don't have the resources to do it. But don't drop something. If something is a good thing to do, or the right thing to do, store it in your back locker and bring it out again at an appropriate juncture. There are things I've had to re-wheel out 3 or 4 times before it's actually come to fruition, and there's one thing that I'm currently trying to reinstill again, and it is the right thing to do, but I accept that things don't always happen in the time frame we want them to, or even sometimes should do. So just don't drop things. Don't think because it hasn't happened it never will happen. Just keep that to yourself, and obviously share it in the first instance, but rekindle it when you get an opportunity. Right. Right, this is a great one. Give a reasonable dollar estimate wherever possible, and there are 2 reasons for that. Having given a reasonable dollar estimate, you would need to have the assumptions built up to get that to that dollar estimate. So that in itself has a robustness around it, a framework around it by which you can sell to people, and then you have a dollar answer. And that the dollar answer is invariably the thing that grabs people's attention. Now, provided no one is going to reconcile your dollar estimate to reality. I mean, you will ultimately, but no one's going to hold you to that. As long as you're not purporting that something's going to save us 20 million and it's 20k, you'd hope that's not going to happen. You should be okay. You just state your assumptions and say, with what is happening now and what I think could happen, this should be the outcome. And I've done this numerous times and been ballpark correct in terms of the actual dollar value. Now, the second part of this is then you can measure against it. You have got the framework by which you think these things can happen, and then you measure the performance against that, and then you could see how things, whether the groups are actually implementing what you've proposed, etc., and then work back from the dollar not happening to see where that's going wrong in the critical chain. So definitely try to give a dollar, if not an hour's, just some empirical measure of what you think will happen if we work together to do this. We think this can happen, because if you can't do that, we all talk about value add, so there has to be value, and unfortunately in most companies the value is in the dollar, but beyond some environmental stuff and quality stuff, but invariably it has a bottom line dollar impact somewhere along the line. So yeah, I'd encourage you to do that. Sorry. Yep, offer solutions where possible. I will always, where I'm coming with an issue, I will always give, even if it's related, not necessarily as a byproduct of the good thing or the bad thing. So quite often it is a bad thing. So it can be, if you're coming with a proposal which has an outright positive outcome, absolutely fine. If you're coming with a problem, come with a solution. Come with something you said, this is happening, but I think if we did X, Y, and Z, it would happen less, or it wouldn't happen at all, or we change that process entirely to this process, and we'll actually switch a negative to a positive. So don't just be the bringer of problems, be the solutions architect with it. Celebrate joint success. Always say we. Even if you think it's 75% you, it was your idea or whatever, it doesn't matter. It matters not. Just say we did this, and this was the dollar outcome, or this was the outcome, or we cut our timelines by 3 weeks or whatever. Just celebrate that success. Whoever was involve them in the we, and communicate that and promote that on both sides of the fence, within your finance group, within their group, because that then you'll then instantly become someone who is a positive force. Equally within the finance group, those guys that haven't necessarily embraced business partnering can see what positive outcome can come from it, and hopefully they'll embrace it too. So definitely celebrate joint success. Don't look for the glory for the finance team or yourself. Look to share that wherever possible. And lastly, business partnering is not finance support. So, and I'll caveat that, because I don't actually think business partnering is necessary for everyone, because of the reasons I've given, or the weight of my experience in how we can best impart and instill business partnering. Some people don't necessarily want to come to work and have an unknown landscape to deal with, and have to deal with different groups and try and create value. Sometimes some people just want to come to work and do a great job, but a great job processing, doing transactional stuff, doing month end, whatever. So we shouldn't make people feel that they have to business partner, and finance support is good enough in its own instance, but finance support is the minimum requirement, I would say, of finance people. We are expected to support our non-finance colleagues in getting them to understand how things work from a finance perspective, and what they can do to improve that or aid it or streamline it. So I just want to stress that not everyone should be a business wants to be a business partner, or even should be a business partner, but we can all support through finance support. But that is not business partnering in my mind, because I think business partnering has to have a value add at the end of it. So I mean, people may disagree. As I say, this is all from my experience and my viewpoint, but as long as even if you disagree, as long as it stimulates some sort of reaction, then I've done a job of sorts. So going back to the whole current situation with COVID, that situations will arise. Now that's obviously a significant situation, a cataclysmic situation that's impacting us all. But there will be other smaller scale, industry specific or your company specific opportunities that will arise, and when you recognize them coming, and if you can plan for them, even better. But when you recognize them, grasp them, because people will gravitate towards you if you're offering to help them understand the situation and the financial aspects of that, because they won't be able to necessarily follow through the cause and effect of what's going on to the likely outcome, or the mitigation strategies that we can have. So I think I've used the finance real estate piece here, because most of us have got the large real estate portfolios. With all the homework that's gone on, there is likely to be, I'd say, a good 20, 30, 40, who knows, 50% rise in homeworking. So our property portfolios will probably shrink to 2/3 of 50% over the next 5 to 10 years. Most of our portfolios are on a lease, so we have time to arrange that. And from experience, with real estate, if you don't give yourself time to make your plans and arrangements and optimize the floor foot space that you need, that will cost you money. So don't do things late in the real estate landscape. But it's just that's just an example. You may have industry specific. So in my particular industry, the whole mobile health, we run clinical trials, and the mobile health aspect of a clinical trial, as in where people are sat at home on a clinical trial with remote monitoring kit on them, etc., or filling in electronic diaries, that hasn't really taken off in what is quite a conservative industry. Through the whole COVID process, that has become more of a prominent feature. So I think that will be that particular aspect of clinical trials is going to grow exponentially as a result, because people have seen A, that it can be done, and B, if you do have a big event like COVID where subjects on clinical trials and can't go into the hospitals and the clinics, you can still run your trial from home. So what's happened with the trials that are running in hospitals and clinics, they have now got a 2, 3, 4 month. I mean, we don't know when this is going to finish entirely. They will have months of delay on getting their product to market prospectively, or knowing how efficacious the product is. So definitely, I think it's going to be an eye opener for the industry, and with that, we need my particular industry supporting that needs to change, because it's not the same people who will run the trials. It will be more systems and data led, and less hands-on physical people traveling to site led. So that's going to be a whole paradigm shift that we need to manage through, and that's not going to be an overnight binary switch from one to the other, because that's not possible. So we will need to sit down and work out what resources we need when, to ensure that the existing trials run off, and then the new type of trial, we have the right people for the new type of trial, etc., and we're pricing that appropriately. So I've been the operational group that's running it has come and asked me to come and help support how we price and structure that out in the bidding scenario. And there are certain things that they're doing that are, again, outside of looking in. I've asked questions as to why they've built this kind of hybrid model on pricing where it's not quite one or the other, and I think they have an appreciation of that. So I think I can add value on some of that without, I'm not a clinician and I'm not a programmer, so I can't have any opinion on that, but I could certainly have an opinion on a logical flow on how we should be bidding our hours, etc. So there are opportunities. You just need to recognize early and put yourself forward to be involved. So, summarization. I can't sit here and tell you what your industry and culture is like. That is down to you to define and describe and work within. So, what I've tried to stress with here is 1 through 3 is all going to be specific on. Sorry, I'm trying to get this out of the way. 1 through 3 is all specific on your circumstances, and 3 is being circumstance, but the organization you're in, the company, the industry, the attitudes of the functions you're trying to work with, that whole what do finance know about X, they may not have that attitude. They may already be half open or fully open to business partnering, and then your approach would change as a result. So you need to shape how you are acting and reacting to your company, industry, geography. Sometimes anything that's unique to what you're doing, you will need to react to that, and no one out there has this PowerPoint or web blog or whatever that can tell you how to do that. They can give you tips and advice and guidance like I've tried to today, but they certainly cannot shape it as well as you can shape it yourself. So just remember that most of the answers are actually within your grasp, and you just need to take a step back and use some of the the advice and the guides and the steers, and they are just advice, guides and steers, and they're not prescriptive how-tos. So hopefully that's come across in my presentation. And number 4 is advice such as myself. So it needs to be complementary. It needs to furnish 1 through 3. So if it does fit in with how your organization is set up, use it. If it doesn't, don't try and force some advice into something that really doesn't work for you. So cherry pick the pieces of advice that work, and then obviously can be an interesting read, but don't try and use something that really doesn't apply to your industry or your experience, etc. So I've been asked to leave the last 15 minutes for questions, which hopefully you have some. So I'm open to field them if you have any.
Yes, from the audience, if you have any questions relating to the Stewart presentation, please feel free to open your mouth, and please you can open your mic and just you can leave the question in the chat box as well. So I think it was very practical advice and practical recommendations given by Stewart. So and especially in the last point, as Stewart, as you mentioned about the culture, I think that's a very important role that plays in the finance business partnering, because we see in many organization culture still like they don't even recognize the importance of finance business partnering, and they treat their finance function as like their back office or back end service provider, or just they keep them at the back end. They don't involve them in operational or strategic decision making. This like very common comment that we get from most of the finance professionals in different company, different industries. Like, our culture is not like that. Our top
Yeah.
management don't involve us in. So what do you recommend? Like how finance function can build their brand as a finance business partner in this type of culture, or lousy culture, you can say?
Yeah, sure. So you can go one of two ways. There's a slow way, and that is to try and chip away at those attitudes. Or you can reckon if there is a single, and most companies have 2 or 3 common irksome things which need to be solved or resolved. Try and think of ways that finance can actually assist in, and it's usually the start of that is usually the provision of data. Now certainly in FP&A, we're lucky enough to have exposure to many aspects of, there's not many systems and data points that are close to us. So with that, data mine for yourselves, having found, hopefully the common issues that are troubling your company are fully known and have been promoted, and if not, that's difficult in itself. But if you know what the issue is, a decreasing margin or whatever, or a new product isn't getting the traction sales wise that you would have expected, just try and data mine and pull out some information which you think may well help teams towards those answers, because if that information is not readily available now, there's a very, very good chance that information will be welcomed, and there's a good chance they will ask you for more information on top of that. So once they realize that you have excuse me, have access to that information and do actually have a commercial or operational brain to think how these things can impact, then you will build on their reliance on you, and then start to work together to get the solutions. Obviously, if they're particularly close, you may have to go the softer route and just chip away at those attitudes, etc., to try and get to the right conclusion. I prefer the big bang theory and try and get something out there that's actually addressing a big topic of pain, because that's what you will be remembered for, and go with that information as high as possible from the start, because that's that is likely to be, they are likely to be more open-minded to finance helping, where they're more on the operational side of things, that they are, without I'm not pigeonholing anyone or whatever, but they are more likely to be open-minded to finance and work with the finance colleagues higher up. So, and they are more likely to be motivated to try and fix the problem. So if you can get that information in front of whomever you can, who can actually influence that group, then do so. But it's a tricky one. It's a tricky one.
Yeah, that's a very good recommendation, I guess.
Yeah.
And there are some more questions. from Mohammed. What are the future key skills for FP&A professionals in your view?
I mean, I've seen people kind of branching out to, going into almost down the road of programming, etc., into languages like Python, Tableau development, etc. But I mean, I think we need. I think if you go down that pathway, you're dropping into an area that's not necessarily going to be our area of expertise. But make friends with your data science team, etc. Definitely, if you've got an AI team working on AI, etc., or predictive elements, obviously by nature of most of our backgrounds, we are working in financial planning and analysis, and we are predictive by nature. But there's machines that can put predictive outcomes out there a lot quicker than we can, so try and leverage the new tech or the newer tech to do the legwork, to then to have the real value on the analysis side of things, and bridging between different systems and data, etc., to give suggestions and hopefully areas that we can work with operations or whomever to work on and push forward. So I don't think that the mindset changes, because we are looking at leveraging information to a better end, be like reduction in cost or margin improvement or whatever else, increase in sales. But just use that same mindset with the technology that's available. Don't be stuck in, have your head stuck in Excel and thinking that's the best way forward. Use Power BI or whatever else. And as I say, to get some time with, if you have a data science team, we have a data science team, and I spend a lot of time with them, but don't necessarily want to go down the path of being a developer, because they will be a better developer than I am. So have an appreciation of the technology that's available, but I don't think you need to go as far as being having developer capability yourself. So yeah.
Okay, that's great. And there is one more question from Sri Prasanna. He said, very nice presentation. Thanks, Stewart, for sharing your real-time experience. And his question is, FVP role, is it a more forward-looking or analysis of historical data?
I think definitely forward-looking. So whenever I work with groups where we're looking at historical stuff that isn't great, etc., I focus with them on fixing the future, not dwelling on the post-morteming in the past. So we learn from the past, but don't be held by it. So try and fix things on the go forward. Don't sit in rooms poring over data that's poor. Work out why it's poor and how we're going to fix it go forward. So definitely always look forward, but we can learn from the past for sure.
Okay, fine. And as one question from myself, as you mentioned regarding the future skills to become and to play the role of finance business partner. So what do you think, to what extent finance professional need non-finance knowledge, for example, relating to operations or marketing or industry knowledge? To what extent they should have that level of knowledge and understanding?
I think you need to have an understanding of how that group works, how they set themselves up financially, how they're measuring themselves currently, and how we think we can measure them better. So their current measure, what they think their measures of success are and why, and then from that you will learn on an almost a KPI or KBI basis, how that group is working. So I mean, marketing, for example, really my interest in marketing would be, what is your marketing program? When's it running from? What is the intention of it? Who's the target audience? How can I then measure your success against that marketing program to feed that back in? And then can that scale? Can that marketing program then scale elsewhere, because it was only focused on the Nordics, for example? So in that brief outline I've just given there, I have no marketing experience. I'm not expected to set up a marketing program, know how a marketing program will work best, but I do need to understand the nature of your program and the goal of the program, and I am very interested in scaling it if it's shown to work. So hopefully that brief example gives you, you just kind of skirt around the periphery of it and understand the concept of what's being planned, but just you don't need to be able to write a marketing program yourself or whatever. You just need to know how they think it's going to work, has it worked, and can you scale it elsewhere.
Yeah, I think that's a very practical and great example to use KPIs. That's right.
Yep. Hello.
Yes.
Hello. Yes. My name is Kweku Ajumendia. I'm speaking from Ghana. I'm the senior FP&A manager with a telecom company. I liked the bit about what Stewart said about being persistent and tenacious. My question is, how do you deal with a business unit head who is very adamant, who would rather stick to gut feelings rather than look at what the data is saying and make a decision out of it? So I would quickly, come up with a story of what is happening, just so that Stewart will be able to answer my question clearly.
Yep.
So in Ghana, we have 3 key telecom companies, and what is happening on the competitive landscape is that you have the market leader and then 2 other telecom companies who are kind of behind the market leader. Now, what happens is that the second player, which is, I would say, my company, we make pricing differences or tariff changes, and then you would have the third player kind of mirroring that decision. So we wanted to boost up our data revenues. So what we did was that we came up with a lot of resources for the data bundles that we were actually selling to customers. And then the third player mirrored that. But what they did was they were quite smart. They made theirs to be non-expiry. Ours doesn't expire. When finance decided to look into this, we realized because the data resources were not expiring, customers were not coming back to repurchase or buy the bundles as it used to be, which was pushing down data revenues. So we did a quite of analysis. We consistently showed it to management that this was what was happening, and it was eroding margins. But then the business, or I would say the CMO, was quite adamant, who had a feeling that over time things were going to turn around. So this is just a quick story to show the adamancy of some business leaders, irrespective of what the data could be saying. So in this case, how do you partner with them without being hard? Because sometimes you come across as also hard, and then they don't even want to listen to you.
That's correct, yeah. And what you described, I think you would have revenue recognition issues with that. If the data never expires, you would need to, how do you give VSO, vendor specific objective evidence to the price for the data bundle? If it never expires, it's until they stop using it, you can't actually say the period that the revenue should be spread over. So that sounds a little bit, in US GAAP terms at least, that sounds a little bit sketchy. So, but just go back to your question though. If you've clearly, I'm guessing you've charted what you've got and what's happening, and your drop off of the data revenue, and you could probably mock up what the revenue would be if you had the expiry periods as well. So I would try and mock up what would happen and show the differential, because if they're seeing just a drop off of revenue, they just they may just shrug their shoulders. But if you show them the what if we did have the expiry on there, and you had a 75% renewal rate, or some you have to infer something, you then see the revenue not drop off at the same rate, and you can then give a revenue value to that over a 12-month period, we would have an extra 2.5 million revenue or whatever. Now, if you've done that and they still don't agree, I personally would escalate, and that is the last resort. That is the kind of the smash the glass and hit the panic button, because if they're not able to see that, and when I escalate, I do warn that I'm going to escalate, because having shown them several times, this is what we're doing and this is the outcome and this is how we can have a better outcome. If people are blind to that, I think at some point you need to escalate, because you are there to do the best you can for that company. And in that particular instance you've just described, it doesn't sound as though that guy is doing the best for the company. He's just maintaining the state that I couldn't tell you what his motives are, but for whatever reason, he's not doing the best thing to optimize and maximize profitability. So just try and show him the flip side to what he's doing and what it could be. And if he's still insisting on that pursuing the path he is, I would look to try and escalate if that's possible. Now, obviously, you don't want to sour the relationship forever or whatever else, but we have a duty in finance, where we're not seeing shareholder value maintained, to do that. So I think you're within your rights to do that, having gone back several times and pointed out the situation, and he hasn't given you anything back that says, well, that's not correct because you haven't got this information. So it sounds like your information is correct. So sorry, quite a long answer to the question, but it's quite an interesting premise.
Thank you. Thank you very much. But just to add a bit to it, what we have done, like you rightly mentioned, if the data resources are not expiring, it goes into what we call the deferred revenue. So the deferred revenue is building up, and we've shown clearly the balances that are actually building up as a result of the plenty resources that are being given out. So I think your answer of escalating is what I'm also finding a bit difficult, because there are hierarchies. In this case, you report to, let's say, the CFO. And there is also this office politics where the business unit head could have a very solid relationship with the CEO. And if they've done this in elsewhere and they have a strong feeling that it's going to work, do you escalate this to, who are you even escalating it to? Is it the board? So that is where it becomes a bit tricky.
Yeah, I know, and I understand that wholeheartedly. But what you've just described, there isn't that. Logically, there is no good outcome, is there? Because, as you said, you're just building up this deferred revenue. You're not, there's a twofold outcome to it, isn't it? You're not able to take the revenue you have got, and you're not generating new revenue by the fact that you would have renewals if you had an expiry date. So it's very wishful and optimistic of him to think that things are going to right themselves, because how would they right themselves unless in your particular instance, I would market that product as saying this has no expiry, and try and drive up more sales that way. But then if you're not seeing the sales drive up, then it's clearly not working. So I don't know what, and maybe go in with that approach. How has he mapped out his expected outcome, and maybe give him that out possibility. If can we agree that if we don't get that outcome in the next 6 to 12 months, just him hoping is not a plan for a good outcome, is it? It's not hoping never did anything. So there's no easy answers there. When politics come back into play, that is a difficult one to circumvent. And if he and the CEO are very close, then yes, you don't have an escalation path. But I would just keep chipping away and have him outline what his plan is beyond hope. So I can't, as I say, it's a difficult one to, especially just on a 5-minute question, but it's definitely an interesting scenario, and one that I've had to escalate things in the past, but it turned out okay, and I've still got a reasonable relationship with the person I escalated on, if you like, but I did warn them that the situation was such that I was forced to do that. So it was I didn't ambush someone with escalating to them, and they didn't know about it. I said, given what I've shown you, and you're not acting on that, I'm going to have to flag this up. And it wasn't the information I passed up was factual. It wasn't inflammatory or judgmental. It was just, these are the facts, and this is being ignored, and we did act on it. So it was a reasonable outcome, but I do understand your reticence.
Okay, I think that's very.
Thank you.
No, thank you.
Thank you, Kawako, for sharing your story, and I think it's helpful for everyone. So I think we have completed more than 1 hour, and any further questions, if you have, you can just send it to our email, and you can connect with, obviously, Stewart on the LinkedIn as well. And if we have further questions, anything, we can take it offline, and I hope we can get in touch with Stewart offline as well.
Yep, so, thanks everyone for your time. Glad someone was there to listen, and hopefully you've taken something from it.
Yeah, exactly. It's very practical, and I think you shared your real-time experience during your career, and I think it's quite useful and very practical content. And thank you very much, Stewart, for your time and for making this insightful presentation. And thank you all the audience for your attendance, and we will see you in our next webinars, and we will be in touch. Thank you, everyone. Take care and stay safe.
Thanks.